Hello, everyone. My name is Rashid Panyan,
I'm Franny Palachek.
I'm Gabrielle Hinman.
I'm Matthew Stewart.
And I'm Sam Donatelli.
and today we'll be talking to you about the impact of agricultural runoff. The goal of this presentation is to explain what agricultural runoff is, describe the social and environmental impact of agricultural runoff on water bodies, convey to you why knowledge of this topic is important, and hopefully give some concise solutions to the issue at hand. Before starting anything else, there's a fair bit of important information we should go through before getting into this presentation. First being first, the agriculture industry itself. A very important facet of the U.S. economy, contributing $1.1 trillion to the U.S. GDP and providing over 22 million U.S. jobs. And one of the more obvious benefits is it's the source of most of the nation's food. That being said, there is an issue with nitrogen runoff, which we'll get into later on. 11 billion kilograms of nitrogen pollution is resulted through agricultural runoff, which can be physical, chemical, and organic pollutants. But in terms of eutrophication, we mainly focus on organic and chemical. Eutrophication is dumping of nitrogen-rich chemicals into water bodies, which can result in algal blooms. Algal blooms can occur naturally, but they are increased by nitrogen pollution, and they do have an impact on the aerobic health of water bodies, which we'll get into later on.
So there are many ways in which agricultural runoff negatively harms the environment. Runoff from farms, also known as non-point source pollution, is the leading source of water quality impairment to rivers and lakes. It is caused by rainfall or snowmelt moving over and through the ground. As the runoff moves, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants, finally depositing them into watersheds through lakes, rivers, wetlands, coastal waters, and even our underground sources of drinking water. Agricultural non-point source pollution is the leading source of water quality impacts on surveyed rivers and lakes, the second largest source of impairments to wetlands, and a major contributor to contamination of surveyed estuaries and groundwater. The most common causes of polluted runoff include poorly located or managed animal feeding operations, overgrazing, plowing too often or at the wrong time, and improper, excessive, or poorly timed application of pesticides, irrigation water, and fertilizer. The pollutants that result from farming and ranching include sediment, nutrients, pathogens, pesticides, metals, and salts. And the picture that I included is an aerial view of Lake Okeechobee in Florida, which suffers from water pollution from agricultural runoff. So another environmental impact is the creation of dead zones, which are also known as hypoxic zones, which refers to a reduced level of oxygen in the water. These zones can occur naturally, but scientists are concerned about the areas created or enhanced by human activity. Excess nutrients that run off land or are piped as wastewater into rivers and coasts can stimulate an overgrowth of algae, which sinks and decomposes in the water. This decomposition process consumes oxygen and depletes the supply available to the marine life. The dead zones can occur on the coast and in the Great Lakes, as well as coastal areas all around the world. The images I included are a map of dead zone locations in the United States, which you can see are mostly on the coastal areas. And then the other picture is the demonstration of dead marine life in one of those dead zones.
The social impacts of agricultural runoff are mainly in the fishing industry. This means commercial, recreational, and seafood. The recreational fishing industry had a gross domestic product increase of 7% between 2015 to 2016. Commercial fishing and seafood had a gross domestic product increase of 2%. You may be wondering why I am giving you this information on why it's growing when this is the negatively impacted industry. The industry started to be negatively impacted in the late 2014 to early 2015. This year, 2015 to 2016, was the largest year of growth, but it was also the last year of growth. These images show what happened in 2016, how many jobs were created, sales supported, the change in revenue for seafood, how this industry impacts the economical trends. Now, the social impacts that also happened and why it was so bad are because of eutrophication. It is that simple. The first, though, is the toxic algae blooms caused by pesticides. The major example for this that I can give you is that in 2014, over 500,000 residents of Toledo, Ohio, were not able to use the city water to cook, brush their teeth, or drink for a number of days because it was so highly acidic that it was not safe for them. These algae blooms are also causing massive die-offs in fish and other wildlife species where they are occurring. Next is the hypoxia in water supplies. This is when there is a lack of dissolved oxygen in the water supply, creating a dead zone. These dead zones are suffocating fish, which is negatively impacting recreation. They are causing a mass of dead fish to rise to the surface and decay there, which impacts swimming, surfing, and other water-based recreational sports like that. And then sport fishing is also being impacted because salmon and trout are dying off in such numbers that fishermen are not able to get the sizes they used to, so they are no longer being interested in this or spending the money on it. Now, there's the other impacts in farm fishing, which is the lack of food supplies caught for wild fish, which is the commercial and seafood industry. These algal blooms are highly affecting the amount of oxygen and other life that can live within these areas, and that is causing the life that is dependent on it to either no longer come to this area, or those that are to have population decreases to the point that they're being put on a watch list to be wondered whether they are endangered or going extinct. This is causing it so fishermen that have to go out are not able to get the number of fish that they used to, so we have to rely more on farm growing. But the idea of having farm grown as opposed to wild is not very nice for many people. The other thing is that there are legislations and regulations put in place for fishermen that are also heavily impacted from this. Like with bluefin tuna, you're only allowed to catch one a day, which makes the fishermen have to be out there longer, which hurts them economically because fuel costs a lot of money. And if you aren't getting a good tuna, you are not making that money back. The other issues that are seen with this are because seafood is not coming in as regularly or as often, or we are relying on farm growing. People are spending less money in that, so fishermen are being laid off. People are having to find new jobs. People are leaving the trade, and it is causing it to have major impacts with that. So all those jobs created between 2015 to 2016 are steadily being lost because of the runoff of pesticides, nitrogen, and other chemicals within the fertilizer and feces.
So the Chesapeake Bay hypoxic zones are quite large, the largest currently measuring about 1 cubic mile in size. In 2007, actually, this dead zone hit a record size of 2.7 cubic miles. Because of eutrophication, these zones are larger than they should be. And some of the activities that are negatively affected or negatively impacted by this include farming, fishing, and recreation, as the water is void of animal life in these regions and typically overgrown with harmful algal blooms. Some good news is that recently these dead zones have been shrinking in size. This is most likely due to the awareness of the people affected and the efforts to combat this issue. In recent years, the dead zone issue has been more heavily combated as people have been losing jobs and resources that were once available to them in this region. Some ways in which the bay is important include being a significant crab and oyster source, as well as providing fishing and many forms of recreation, all of which are limited in areas plagued by hypoxia. Property value is also decreased when a dead zone forms in the area, which surely sparks efforts to solve this issue. The Chesapeake Bay dead zones have been shrinking in recent years due to increased cleanup efforts. More controls have been placed on fertilizer and pesticide use, and more natural barriers have been created to stop the excess nutrient runoff. The work done to reduce the dead zone has actually created enough jobs to the point where this work is economically beneficial. And for now, the Chesapeake Bay is heading in a good, healthier direction.
So for our solutions, there are two main areas that farmers could improve on. The first being increased restrictions on fertilizers used. And the main way that this can be accomplished is by using something called integrated pest management, or IPM for short. And this is essentially just a combination of techniques and practices based on certain factors, such as using specific soils and crop conditions based on the climate and pest history of the area being used. And by doing all these things, it can reduce the need for pesticides heavily. For example, by using the right soil for a crop would increase the chance that the crop reaches maturity and can be harvested without heavy use of pesticides or fertilizers. Another way to protect against the chemicals that will have to be used is by creating natural borders between fields and waterways, which kind of segues into the second solution, which is just promoting more eco-friendly farming practices. So one of the main ways that this could be done is by planting native trees, shrubs, and other greenery as a barrier between a field that's being used and any sort of waterway. And this will reduce the chance of those harmful chemicals seeping into the water. Likewise, by keeping livestock away from the water's edge will also eliminate the chance of phosphates and nitrates entering and polluting the water. By leaving the stubble or loose grass that grows over a tilled field in the winter saves not only on gas required to maintain the field, but also prevents the spread of any of those chemicals that could be trapped in the stubble from escaping. And lastly, just by covering manure piles, it's once again another way to limit the spread of any of those chemicals that could be secreted, and it almost eliminates the chance that it could enter into those waterways.